get you more on that story, speak to one of the MPs who were in the room when the Reserve Bank governor was in Parliament today, the UDM's Nqabayomzi. Kwankwa. Very good evening to you, sir. From your contribution to the session today, it was quite clear that you were no more convinced by the explanation given today than when we got that brief media summary from the Reserve Bank. Am I right?
Yeah, well, they brought us absolutely nothing. It was a statement that contained, was littered or full of nothingness, really. They repeated the same thing that they said in the statement they issued immediately after they concluded the investigation, without answering the most important and some of the pertinent questions. For example, they were saying the governor of the Reserve Bank mentioned the fact that Phala Phala was engaging in exports. Nothing was exported. Everything is still a Phala Phala farm. So what was the transaction for? They did not ask the most important and pertinent questions. And the other issue for us is you use a guarantee. There's a bank guarantee when you're about to engage in a transaction where you have to prove that you have enough funds to be able to purchase whatever good you require, say from another country. A bank guarantee, which is confirmation that is usually sent by your bank, and that then gives the seller enough time to meet all the requirements. All the other nonsense which they said today did not really make sense. It's a cover-up. It's a whitewash. We've said it. And as the UDM, you will recall that my president, Bantu Lomisa, wrote to the Reserve Bank governor on the 22nd of August, asking that we be given a copy of the report, and obviously cited the same reasons as cited today and said we can't do that. We are going to set in motion a process, the PIA process, in order to ensure that we get the report. Because the danger here, Tembegil, is that without us being given an opportunity to apply our minds to the procedure that was followed, whether they interpreted the law properly in arriving at the conclusions, we'll never know exactly as to whether or not they applied the law correctly, whether they followed the correct procedures in terms of investigation. And without the report itself and detailing as to what steps they followed, it means that the findings that they came up with and the recommendations that they're making are meaningless, really. They mean absolutely nothing. You can't take them forward to any process. And we'll challenge the Reserve Bank in court and make sure that we have the final say on this matter, primarily because you are dealing with a head of state here that is who has serious allegations against him of contravening Exchange Control Act, of money laundering and all the other allegations. Surely from a constitutional point of view, there must be sections of law that can trump the nonsense that they're hiding behind.
So the thing with Phala Phala is, as we've seen already, there are multiple reports out already, at least 3 from the SARB itself, from SARS, as well as the Public Protector's Office. All 3 have so far cleared the president of any wrongdoing, but it's not the end of the road, is there? Because there are other investigations as well. So even if he is cleared by the Reserve Bank and the 2 other entities, there may still be, let's say, perhaps a criminal investigation that finds that there is something, a case to answer to. So this does not necessarily mean he's entirely off the hook.
Well, he will be off the hook. Firstly, SARS reports to the Minister of Finance, and so does the Governor of the Reserve Bank. By the way, the Public Protector also reports to the same members of the executive, even though administratively that Public Protector is supposed to report to Parliament. But you know what happens in the country. The only arm of government that is independent, that will be able to inquire into this thing and make sure that it gets to the root, to the bottom of this problem, and perhaps even apply the law properly in terms of giving us access to the report and us being able to process this matter properly, would be the judiciary. So the matter has ultimately to be taken to court so that we can resolve the dispute, so that we can know who's right and who's wrong. But also there must be a parliamentary process that also kicks in, because President Ramaphosa is the head of the executive and the head of state, and he accounts directly to Parliament. Perhaps Parliament should also conduct its own investigation with respect to the Phala Phala saga and the exchange control issues, look into the reports of SARS, look into the report of the Reserve Bank, compile and see how it can arrive at its own conclusion, because it can't pretend as if it's not an independent arm of government that can be able to inquire into any matter that affects the country and the taxpayers' money and whatever happens in our borders.
I wonder, though, in trying to get access to the full report by the Reserve Bank, how much value you think there'd be in that, especially in determining the next moves when the outcome itself, what they've found, which you fundamentally disagree with, will be unchanged even through the full reading?
No, we don't care about the nonsense they've released. What we want to do is to show to the public, firstly, we owe it to the public to show the public that this is a whitewash, this is a cover-up. But also, if you are going to challenge the findings in court, you need to understand the rationale behind it and the process undertaken in investigating, so that you can able to understand whether they applied and interpreted the law properly, and whether they followed the right and the correct procedures, whether they do not just rely in some instances on investigation or documents that were submitted elsewhere without actually interviewing all the witnesses and so on to arrive at their conclusions. So you are not able to deal with the findings if you don't know what went into the report itself.
And I want to go back to the point you're making about Parliament perhaps coming back here and launching an investigation of its own. There was already that independent panel set up last year which found that there was in fact some level of evidence in what they found that the President may have a case to answer to. We know that leading to any form of impeachment process, that was rejected because the ANC used its majority in the House. So do you think any other parliamentary process would find full expression, just given the numbers that the ANC holds and the fact that they're unlikely to, quote-unquote, throw their leader to the wolves, if you will?
Well, the African National Congress government detests accountability with passion. So we know that they would block any attempt to try and investigate this matter independently. Because remember, the parliamentary process is that the voting process where you decide ultimately at the end of the process whether you agree or you are against a particular report is a decision-making process. But the investigation itself would be able to actually inform the public, tell the public as to what has happened so that the public is able to make up its own mind. Whether the ANC defeats us then in the voting process is a debate for another day, which they are likely to do. But what we want is a process where people can be held to account, witnesses can be subpoenaed to appear before Parliament so that they can answer questions around issues that we're not clear about. We also need, as an arm of government, to say, apply our minds to understand the creative interpretation of sections of the Exchange Control Act by the Reserve Bank, whether it's what the drafters of the legislation wanted to say, or whether it's in the spirit of the law itself, or whether they were being mischievous in an attempt to protect the president. So Parliament cannot sit back and twiddle its thumbs while this saga continues to unfold, and the different arms and the departments, rather the different departments of government, are just falling all over themselves trying to protect the president and shield him from accountability, which is the reason why they decided to bury the expert panel report in any event. They were trying to prevent President Ramaphosa from accountability because, remember, they said the matter was in court. As soon as they defeated the report in Parliament, then he decided not to pursue the matter further in court. So
Let me ask you a quick final question, sir, because you mentioned the entities so far that have reports out, the Public Protector, the Reserve Bank and SARS. How damaging would it be for their credibility if indeed, upon review, there's a finding that they did not do a proper job in their investigations?
They've already destroyed their credibility. They've already destroyed their reputation, especially the South African Reserve Bank. SARS has always been influenced politically in the past, and that happens to still be the case, I'm sure, even now. The South African Reserve Bank, to a large extent, even though you can't, it would be naive to assume that they are free of political influence, but to a large extent, you thought that the Reserve Bank was going to deal with this matter professionally, independently, impartially, which is not what has happened. I am sure that when we take the matter to court, ultimately, the justice system and the court, rather, the judiciary, will find in our favor if you were to consider all the grey areas, all the loopholes in the reports that have been released by the different institutions, including the South African Reserve Bank.
Nqabayomzi Kwankwa, member of the United Democratic Movement in Parliament, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Much obliged.